Good afternoon. How are you? It's great to be learning with you on a Friday with Shabbos approaching. Let's light up the darkness. Who's with us? Yehudit in South Carolina, wishing everyone a rejuvenating Shabbos. Bill in mid-Missouri. Sounds like a fascinating daf we're in for today. I agree. Stephen in New Hampshire, Shandora in the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Gordo in Scotland, Bella in Florida, Clarice Cohen, Shabbat Shalom from CDMX. That's Mexico? Not Distrito Federal, right? CD. What is CD? Let me know. Carrie in Kinsman, Ohio, Gisette in Colorado, Tom in PA, Sharon is baking Hummentashen with the granddaughter. That's a high priority activity. Drop everything, and I look forward, God willing, to the day I can do the same. Guy in Dayton, Ohio, Leona says, good afternoon, friends. Clarice, yes, in Mexico City. Okay. Bienvenida, Clarice. Tom, prayers please for our Senator John Fetterman, hospitalized for depression, may have a complete healing. Ciudad de Mexico. Oh, I get you. Ciudad de Mexico. Thank you. Okay, and over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie checking in from Georgia. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our very own Jeannie Zeeb Schechter, in memory of Dee Mellor, a good friend who died February 14th, a year ago. May Dee's memory always be for a blessing. And also, Gina, you didn't mention it here, but, in your family, there should be a healing, the healing that you've been praying for. May it be speedy and complete. And may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of AT Daily, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. We appreciate it very much. Okay, so today's daf, very short, one of the shortest, and concerned principally with, as we've been talking about, we know that we're in Tractate Nazir, we're on page 25, we're in chapter 4, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 3 here in chapter 4. Generally, these are the vows of nazirus. And a Nazir, a Nazirite, when he takes on that purely voluntary obligation, which we've seen over and over again, the sages discourage one to take such a vow. And it's only possible when the temple is standing. Why? Because part of that vow is that when you conclude your term of Nazirus, you bring certain offerings, a sin offering, a burnt offering, and a peace offering. And if you should violate your vow during the term by coming into contact with the dead, entering a cemetery, assisting a burial, etc., which are actually good deeds, right? You're only precluded from them because you took the vow of Nazirus. Yet another reason it's discouraged. So if you became impure for the dead during your term of Nazirus, you have to bring the offerings of impurity, which are a little bit different, right? I think that was a burnt offering, a guilt offering, and a sin offering. Both times the sin offering. So, right, So for conclusion of Nazirus, sin offering, guilt offering, and peace offering. At any rate, we're not going to go into the specifics of that. We'll talk enough about that in a moment. The point is that offerings were required. Offerings can only be brought when the temple is standing. We haven't practiced animal sacrifice in nearly 2,000 years. Now, as we get, into the weeds about these animal sacrifices and their particulars and what happens if an offering becomes disqualified or if the reason for bringing the offering disappears after the animal is designated and before the offering is brought, as in the case of a woman who vows Nazirus, and then her vow is nullified by her husband, or a man who vows Nazirus, and then he has his vow nullified by halakhic authority, but he already designated an animal for the offering to be brought at the end. And what happens to this? As we get into the weeds on these kinds of questions with the offerings, it all seems very remote to us, right? We haven't practiced animal sacrifice in 2,000 years. Apparently, sacrifices are still brought in some parts of the world, but for most of us, it's just not part of our daily experience, has never been part of our daily experience, seemingly unimaginable. We recoil in horror with our modern sensibility when we even think about, bringing animals, not to eat them, not to pet them, but just to be sacrificed. And horror of horrors, if an animal designated to be a sin offering can no longer be used as a sin offering, it's left to die in a really sort of cruel and seemingly heartless way. All of this is just so foreign and remote to us that I think it's a challenge for us to connect with these teachings on a spiritual level. And I want to just address that a little bit before we start, to maybe provide a little context that might help us as we get into the weeds, as it were. So I was reading one of my friends and really favorite Torah teachers in the world, Rabbi David Aaron. He actually runs a yeshiva in Jerusalem that is probable my son will attend next year. But I've interviewed Rabbi Aaron a bunch of times. He's been on the show here with us. I interviewed him both in Israel and in the United States. Really gifted, interesting teacher. And he wrote about this subject. So the first thing he said is, if you look at, our great teacher Maimonides, right, the Rambam, his opinion was that God provided a sacrificial system in the Torah because the Jews who were coming out of Egypt were living in a world where that was the primary form of worship, right? It was unthinkable that somebody would, give thanks and praise to a god and not bring animal sacrifices. It was just the primary way that people worshiped gods in the ancient world. So what God did is he said, okay, your standard mode of worship, we're not going to completely uproot it immediately, but we're going to redirect it. Rather than bowing to idols of make-believe gods, you can prepare an animal, sacrifice it, and bring an animal sacrifice so that it's your normal form of worship. But the main thing we're going to change is its focus, right? It's not going to be to some idol that you create to make you feel good. Now you're going to give that gift to the Holy One above, the creator of the world. And many nuances and rules are going to be attached to the manner of bringing these sacrifices to keep you mindful that you're focused on bringing the sacrifice to a place that God appointed that it be brought and in a manner that's going to bring you close, right? And it's to help you cleave to the Lord. Even though he's not visible or tangible the way that avodah zarah, the way that an idol would be, a little statue. What's nice about those statues is you can look at them, see them, feel them, touch them, right? God is ineffable. God is everywhere. God is not tangible. And so, it was a kind of nursing along of the human psyche from the ancient mode of worship to a more modern mode of worship. And so the idea that Maimonides was teaching with that is that the sacrificial system was always intended to be temporary. Now, for sure, that is not a universally held belief in the Jewish tradition. And there are many who say, we look forward to the day when the Messiah comes, the third temple is built, and we will be able to fulfill all these commandments that are spelled out in the Torah about bringing animal sacrifices, that there will be a return to the sacrificial system. On the other hand, many people do agree with Maimonides, including Rav Kook, right? So the great Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of the modern state of Israel, said that when the temple is rebuilt, we will bring offerings, but not animal offerings. That we will continue to bring the meal offerings, right? The flour mixed with the oil and the frankincense. But even that would be temporary. And that eventually, sort of like the way it says, I believe in Isaiah, that it will be a house of prayer for all peoples, right? So that the temple, the third temple, will be much more like a synagogue where people come and pray, rather than a place like the ancient temple, which was this center for bringing the sacrifices, where the Kohanim, the priests, would serve and do the action of slaughtering and offering up the animals. Now, which, we can't know what it's going to be, whether there will be a sacrificial system when the temple is rebuilt or not. We won't know until it happens. But in the meantime, I think that, like what was it that God was offering the people with the sacrificial system, even if it was to sort of wean them off animal sacrifice and enter a more modern, now 2,000 years old, but a more modern form of worship. And I think it's worth imagining what it was like to bring an offering. We read all these rules and we get hung up on what's the right way, what's the wrong way, what's the this, the that. But imagine the experience of it, right? So most people did not live in Jerusalem, and there were no cars or trains or planes. So, maybe you rode your donkey, maybe you rode in a wagon, but you didn't go very fast. And many people walked, right? And so if you can imagine this pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which is uphill, by the way, bringing your animal with you that you were going to offer as a sacrifice. Now, maybe you brought money and you purchased it there, or maybe you brought it with you all the way from your farm. And, people in the ancient world, just like in the United States, even 100 years ago, certainly 150 years ago, the primary occupation was farmer, right? More people were farmers than anything else. They were in tune with their livestock. They were in tune with their animals. They never ate meat and had the experience of just, meat came in a styrofoam box from the supermarket, completely devoid of its animal identity. They were in touch with the natural world, and specifically the animal world, right? And so if you walk with your animal, for miles and miles and miles, for days and days and days, to bring it to the temple, to offer it as a sacrifice, was very meaningful to you. It was not a small thing to bring an animal sacrifice. You didn't do it in a cavalier way. You weren't flippant about it. It was very intense, right? It's this animal that accompanied you. Maybe you raised it from when it was a lamb or a kid. You walked with it. Maybe your kid who was coming with you gave it a name. I mean, your child gave the animal a name. And you had some kind of a relationship with that animal. And when you came and offered it up, and there was blood involved and there was death involved, it was a big offering. It was a serious thing that you were doing. And the sacrificial system was replaced by a prayer system, and we pray 3 times a day, and often we're in a hurry and we get in and we want to make sure we're yotze, that we fulfilled our obligation to pray. We rush through the liturgy and get in, get out. Okay, I did what I was supposed to do. But what you always want to do, and that's natural. I mean, if you're praying with a minyan, right, in a synagogue 3 times a day, we all live lives. We're all busy people. It's natural that many times you're going to be in a hurry. But what you'd like is that at least once in every prayer service, you have a moment, it's full stop. What am I doing here? I'm connecting with the one above. And I'm offering my thanks for everything that he gives me, right? If I'm healthy, thank God I'm healthy. If I have clothes on my back, thank God I have clothes on my back. If I have my faculties, I can think, I can speak, I can smell, I can see, I can hear. Thank you, God, for these gifts. Nothing is a given. I could lose any one of them at any moment. I could lose my life. The fact that I'm alive another day, if I'm so blessed to have family, to have friends, to have a parnassa, a livelihood. Thank you. What a gift. And to give back. And if I'm bringing a sin offering, right? If I'm bringing a sin offering, what happened? So I abused the gifts that I was given. Rabbi Aaron talks about we're given eyes to see, what a gift, and then we aim them at things we shouldn't be looking at. We're given a mouth to speak, what a gift, and then we use it to speak gossip and slander. We're given ears to hear, what a gift, and we use it to listen to gossip and slander and attune ourselves to dreck and to garbage. And we so often misuse our gifts. And it's a kind of ingratitude that we just blaze over day after day and never think about it. And if you take that full stop and think about it, I've been given so much, and what am I doing with it, right? And that's why there's a tachanan every morning, and for some both morning and evening, where we have like a sort of short form Yom Kippur, where we confess our sins and cast our heads down, and try to get into that introspective space for a few minutes and say, God, I'm so sorry. And every night I drown, I soak my pillow with my tears. Right? And we say that even though we probably don't do that, but if we think about it, we should, because. And there's so many things that we do wrong. And then we can say to ourselves, well, I don't do so bad. I'm doing good. I just work at my job. I provide for my family. I give money to charity. What's so bad? And it's true, we're not so bad. Maybe compared to most people, we're doing pretty well. But could we be doing better? Could we be using our gifts better? Couldn't we waste less time? And getting into that space, it's a good and healthy, moment of questioning ourselves, a moment of shame. Not one that we should then, spiral into depression, but rather, God, thank you for being so patient with me. Thank you for being so forgiving with me. Thank you for blessing me with another day, with all my gifts intact. Please, God, help me, strengthen me that I should do better today, that I should use my gifts better, that I should accomplish more today, that I should do more good, learn something more, speak a kind word to somebody that I might not have otherwise, because we're all your children, and I know how much, just like any parent gets joy when one of their children treats the other with kindness. It gives God great joy when we treat others with kindness, especially strangers, especially needy people, especially the annoying person that we'd rather avoid. And I think that there's an immediacy and an intensity and almost a drama that pops, as it were, when you're bringing an animal sacrifice, because, death is involved, right? What could be a bigger reminder of our own mortality and our finite number of days in which to do good and to be fruitful in this world than seeing, a fellow mammal end its days as part of our worship. Now, we've lost that, right? And the question is, can we find that same kind of intensity and desire to praise and do good and give back to the one who gives us everything? Can we find that same, kind of intensity without the animal sacrifices and with its substitute, right? The prayer system and the system of blessings. We say that the dinner table has replaced the altar, right? So, what happens at our meals? Are we mindful? Are we grateful? Are we being a blessing to the people around us that we're eating with? Or are we talking gossip, and are we teasing each other, and are we being mean to each other, and are we reminding people of their faults? Right? Can we find inspiration in these ancient laws about that ancient sacrificial system and say, oh yes, this is relevant to me. Yes, it's relevant, because I'm just as blessed now as my ancestors were 2,000 years ago. And I want to be able to give back to God, and I can't do it with these animals, but how can I do it? To ask that question is to begin to find the answer. All right, let's get into it. We pick this up at the bottom of page 24 here in chapter 4 of Tractate Nazir. It's the 17th volume of the Talmud. Tractate Nazir. So it was stated above with regard to one who separated money for his nazirus and then died, right? So this person was a nazir and he put aside money to purchase the offerings that he has to bring to the temple at the conclusion of his nazirus. And then he died before he could bring those offerings. So now we have a separation between if he set the money aside, but did he designate that money for the particular offerings, right? The sin offering, the peace offering, and I think the guilt offering. Or did he just say, this is my pool of money for my offerings, but I haven't specified which coins are for which offering, right? So the person set aside money for his nazirus offerings and then he died. If he had unallocated funds, so then all the funds are allocated for communal gift offerings that are brought in the temple on behalf of the whole nation. Now we're on 25a. So the Gemara asks, but the money for the sin offering is mingled with these unallocated funds. And as we've seen, a burnt offering that can't be used for the conclusion of nazirus can still be offered as a burnt offering. A peace offering that can't be used as a concluding offering of nazirus can still be given on the altar as a peace offering. But a sin offering that's set aside for the conclusion of nazirus cannot be used as some other sin offering, nor as a peace offering or a burnt offering or any other kind of offering. Money is set aside to be a sin offering. If the sin offering can't be brought because the person died or they achieved atonement some other way, that money has to be thrown in the ocean. It can't be used for anything. So the money but now if he has money set aside for his offerings, but unspecified which offerings, so he set it aside for 3 offerings. One of them was a sin offering. So there's included in that bundle of money that's allocated for offerings, but not specifically for which offerings. Some of it was for a sin offering. So don't we have to set aside some of that money and throw it in the ocean? How can we use it for these gift offerings? So the money for the sin offering is mingled with these unallocated funds. How can it all be used for gift burnt offerings? And Rabbi Yochanan said it is an accepted halacha, an accepted law with regard to a nazir, that his unallocated funds are used for gift offerings, despite the fact that they include the value of a sin offering. And Reish Lakish said, the verse states, Leviticus 22:18, whether for any of their vows or for any of their gift offerings, which are brought to the Lord as a burnt offering. And so in this verse, the Torah states that the surplus of a vow shall be for a gift offering. So here too, if the vow of nazirus cannot be fulfilled due to the death of the one who took the vow, so then the money is for a gift offering. And the Gemara asks, well, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who disputes Reish Lakish, who said that there is a law with regard to a nazir, it is for this reason that if the funds were unallocated, yes, the money is used for gift offerings, but if they were allocated, meaning part of the money was set aside to be a sin offering specifically, then no, they may not be used for this purpose, as this is the law passed down by tradition, presumably all the way back to Moses at Sinai. There were certain laws that were given at Sinai orally, not in the written Torah. Many other of the oral laws were created by the rabbis, the sages, to protect us from coming to violate written laws. But there were some oral laws that are included in the Mishna, and then we say go back to Moshe l'Sinai, right? That there were oral laws given to Moses at Sinai, and this seems to be one of those. However, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, who derives the law from the verse, right, Rabbi Yochanan says we had that law all the way back. It was given to Moses at Sinai. Reish Lakish says, no, we can derive that law for any of their vows or for any of their gift offerings. Why state specifically unallocated funds? Even allocated money should be used for gift offerings after the death of their owner. And Rav has said you cannot say that this law should apply to allocated funds, as the Tana, the school of Rabbi Yishmael, has already ruled in this regard. For the Tana explained the following verse that deals with the obligation to bring consecrated animals to the temple. Only your sacred things that you have and your vows. And the verse is speaking of the offspring of consecrated male peace offerings and their substitutes, i.e., when one says a non-sacred animal should substitute for a sacred animal. So here we're getting into sort of like derivative offerings. So taking a step back, Okay, we're bringing offerings to the temple. So first of all, they need to be unblemished offerings, right? When you give to God, you give your best, right? It has to be a fine animal, unblemished. The Torah also says that if you consecrate an animal and then later you say, you know what? I'm not gonna, that animal I set it aside to give to God, but I'd rather substitute a different animal. Maybe because I said, you know what? I'm giving him my best. It's too good. Let me give this other one that's not quite as good. And we can understand why this is definitely going to be a problem. But even if you said, you know what? I want to give God an even better animal. So let me give him this one over here as the substitute, and the more average animal I'll take back and put in my herd. No, you can't do that. Once you consecrate an animal, it's consecrated, it has to be brought as an offering. If you attempt to substitute another animal for the first, both the substitute and the original animal have now become consecrated, and both of them have to be brought to the temple as offerings. What kind of offering? What do you do with what's called a tamura, a substitute? That's a whole other body of law that we're just happening on a little bit here. Also, what if you designate an animal to be a particular kind of offering, elevation offering, peace offering, and before you can actually bring it to the temple, because you can't just go there any day, right? Most people only went there during a pilgrimage festival, during Passover, during Shavuos, during Sukkot. And in the meantime, that animal, maybe you didn't realize when you designated it, it was pregnant and now it gives birth. So what about the baby? Is that baby consecrated or not? It's sort of like the fruit of a consecrated animal is consecrated most likely. So these are the kinds of questions we're examining. So with regard to these animals, what is their means of remedy? You shall take and go to the place the Lord shall choose. Deuteronomy 12:26. Now, one might have thought that this means that he must bring them up to the temple, and yet he does not sacrifice them, but withholds water and food from them so that they should die, like a sin offering that can no longer be offered. Therefore, the verse states, and you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord your God, and the blood of your offerings shall be poured out against the altar of the Lord your God, and you shall eat the flesh. That's peace offerings. You can eat the flesh of the peace offering. Now, the Tan explains that this verse comes to say to you this: in the manner that you treat a burnt offering, you must treat its substitute. In other words, it should be sacrificed in its entirety, right? A peace offering, you eat part of it. A burnt offering, an olah, goes up entirely on the altar as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. In the manner that you treat a peace offering, you must treat their offspring, as its inner parts must be sacrificed on the altar, and the rest is eaten by the owners. That's for a peace offering. And the offspring of a peace offering, same thing. Now, one might have thought that the offspring of a sin offering and the substitute of a guilt offering should also be treated like the original offering. They too should be sacrificed on the altar like the sin offerings and guilt offerings. Therefore, the verse states only, which excludes these cases. And this is the analysis, the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva says, in the case of a guilt offering, this exposition is not necessary. As it says, it is a guilt offering, Leviticus 5:19, from which it may be inferred, it alone shall be sacrificed in its current state, but not its substitute. And this Baraisa explicitly teaches that the surplus money of a sin offering cannot be used for a different offering. Consequently, if you set aside money for a sin offering and then you end up spending less than the amount of money you set aside to purchase the sin offering, you might think that excess money you could just give to the temple and put it in the communal offerings box. But no, since that money was set aside to be a sin offering, what's not needed to be a sin offering just has to be consumed. And what do? You throw it in the ocean. So since the Gemara has cited the above Baraisa, it analyzes it in detail. The Baraisa that we're now referencing teaches one might have thought that one must bring them up to the temple and withhold water and food from them so that they should die, like a sin offering that cannot be brought as a sin offering. And the verse states, and you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings. So the Gemara asks, why would one think he should act in this manner? After all, it is only with regard to the offspring of a sin offering that we learned it must be left to die, but not other offerings. Why then is it necessary to derive the exclusion of the offspring of other offerings and the substitution of other offerings from a verse? And the Gemara answers, if it were not for the verse, I would say that the offspring of a sin offering may be killed anywhere. Okay, you can't use it for yourself. You can't bring it as a sin offering. So okay, it has to be killed. It can't be used. So just do that. Why do you need to bring it to Jerusalem and up to the temple for that purpose? I.e., it need not be brought to the temple and left to die there. Now we're on 25b. But the offspring of other sacred animals for peace offerings must be brought to the temple and left to die there. And the verse therefore teaches us that one does not leave the offspring of peace offerings to die. Rather, they are sacrificed upon the altar like a peace offering or a burnt offering. So the Gemara continues to discuss that Baraisa. The Baraisa teaches one might have thought that the offspring of a sin offering and the substitute of a guilt offering should also be treated so. And by the way, one thought that I had about this, again, taking like a modern spiritual teaching out of these laws, is if you knew that, being careless with the laws of sacrifices might result in, it might result in that you are required to be cruel with an animal, right? The animal that's brought as a sin offering, if it can't be used as a sin offering, it's left to die. We're appalled by that fate for the animal. So you would do anything in your power to avoid that outcome. You'd be very careful, right? That you wouldn't by mistake substitute for a sin offering, that you wouldn't by mistake make it impossible to complete the sin offering process. You'd be mindful, you'd be meticulous, and make sure that everything goes right, so that you're not left in that situation and the animal, God forbid, is not left in that situation. Now that, a prayer practice has substituted for the animal sacrifices, it becomes so easy. I missed some prayers. I rushed through them. I got to temple late, so I just skipped the whole first part. So what happened really? No one even noticed. God noticed, but he's not... he's not calling to complain and tell me that I did wrong. So it's just so easy for us to become sloppy. As we read these laws, may we take a little extra inspiration to say, let me not be sloppy. Let me be a little bit more meticulous. Let me arrive at synagogue on time and say the prayers at the beginning of the service. Let me be mindful in the middle rather than chatting with my buddy next to me. Let me be mindful toward the end when I'm getting a little impatient and thinking about the food at the Kiddush. Right? If we were doing animal sacrifices instead of prayers, we'd be more careful. Let's see if we can inspire ourselves to be that careful when we're praying or when we're saying blessings at the table. I know myself. Sometimes I'm just in a hurry and I just rush through the blessing before eating. I pretty much don't eat without saying a blessing. I rarely forget that. But sometimes, like, the first bite is in my mouth. And I'm like, oh, I didn't say my bracha. And there's a teaching about that. If possible, remove the food from your mouth or move it to the side if it's not gross and say the blessing. But I know at that moment I have made my blessing in a non-optimal manner. It's ungrateful. God allowed me to have this food, and I couldn't take the 2 seconds before I had the first bite to say the blessing properly, look at it, say it slowly, mean it, right? And at the end of the meal, when I'm saying the blessing after, take the extra 30 seconds or a couple minutes and say it properly, right? Let's try to be a little bit more ancient-minded with our reverence for the Lord in these practices that we have. It's not so hard to do. We're just so full of ourselves that we don't take the time to do it right. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so the Gemara asks, with regard to a guilt offering as well, this law is learned as a tradition. Any situation that if it were to occur with a sin offering, it would be left to die, i.e. any offering that is invalid in such a manner that the sin offering animal would have to be left to die, which includes a substitute. If it occurs with a guilt offering, it is left to graze, right? In a situation where the sin offering can't be brought, it's left to die. If it's a guilt offering that has that situation, we don't leave it to die. It's only for sin offerings. With a guilt offering, it's left to graze, right? The animal just lives out its life. It can't be worked. It can't be eaten. It can't be sold. You just let it live out its life. It's a great blessing for the animal. And then when it develops a blemish, so that it would be unfit for the altar, even if the situation hadn't changed, at that point you can sell it, and then with the money that you get, then you have to buy a guilt offering. All right. So if it occurs with a guilt offering, it is left to graze. So if so, it is clear that this guilt offering cannot be sacrificed. Wait, I just want to make sure I'm in the right place. It is left to graze until it develops a blemish that is no longer fit for the altar. So why then is a verse required to teach this law? So rather, the argument is as follows. If one would have learned this ruling only from the aforementioned law transmitted to Moses from Sinai, I would say it is admittedly the law that the offspring of a sin offering must die, and the substitute of a guilt offering is left to graze. But if he sacrificed it anyway, right? You have that sin offering that can't be used as a sin offering has to be left to die. A guilt offering that can't be brought as a guilt offering because circumstances changed, it's left to graze and later sold for money, and that money is given to a new offering or to temple upkeep, whatever it is. But if you don't follow the law, right? What happens if, the sin offering should have been left to die, but you couldn't bring yourself to do that, so you offered it as a sin offering anyway. So then what? Where am I? But if he sacrificed it regardless, he would not be liable to receive any punishment for it. You might think that. The verse therefore teaches us that if he sacrifices the offspring or substitute of a guilt offering, he transgresses a positive mitzvah by it, as derived from the verse, only your sacred things which you have and your vows you shall take and go to the place that the Lord shall choose. Now the same Baraisa teaches that Rabbi Akiva says, in the case of a guilt offering, this exposition is not necessary, as it says, it is a guilt offering, which indicates it alone shall be sacrificed in this current state, but not its substitute. So the Gemara asks, so why do I need a verse for this law? We learned it as a law. Any situation that if it were to occur with a sin offering, it would be left to die. If it occurs with a guilt offering, it is left to graze. So if so, it is clear that this guilt offering cannot be sacrificed. The substitute of a guilt offering or the offspring cannot be sacrificed. So the Gemara answers, so too, this is correct. And when the verse comes to teach a law, it comes for that which was said by Rav. As Rav Huna said that Rav said, with regard to a guilt offering that was consigned to grazing, i.e. it had been ruled that the animal must be left to graze until it develops a blemish, as it could not be sacrificed as a guilt offering, at which point it was sold so that the proceeds could be used for voluntary burnt offerings, and one transgressed, and he slaughtered the guilt offering itself for the sake of a burnt offering, rather than using an animal purchased with the money of its sale, it is valid. You're not supposed to do that. It's wrong to do that. But if you did do that, it's sort of like the loophole works. So the Gemara infers from Rav's statement, the reason for this ruling is that it is a guilt offering that was consigned to grazing, from which it may be inferred that if it were not consigned in this manner, it is not valid as a burnt offering. And this is because the verse states it is a guilt offering, which indicates that it shall be in its current state. And if it were sacrificed as a different offering, it is invalid. And that's where we're going to leave off. It's tough. These laws are tough. They're confusing. There's so much nuance in the offerings. And we do our best to learn it and to follow it. But I'm hoping that the thoughts that I've shared today can hopefully inspire us to try to treat our prayer practice and our practice of saying blessings before and after eating and all the other activities that require blessings, that we should be a little bit more careful. Right? A little bit more careful as if we were bringing animal sacrifices and knew that if we were negligent or careless, an animal would suffer because of that. And that in all these things, our lives are at stake. There's a lot at stake. Prayer is not a low stakes activity. It's much higher stakes than we give it credit for. Let's treat it accordingly. All right, let's see if we got any comments or questions on this. Joseph, is tzedakah, charity, considered as a sacrifice, or is it just prayer that replaces it? It's an interesting question. I don't think that could be, you see, because there was an obligation to give tzedakah even when we were bringing animals, right? When you bring an animal sacrifice, no one benefits from that, but you have fulfilled your obligation to bring the sacrifice. If it's a peace offering, okay, you'll eat it with other people. If it's a sin offering, okay, the priests will receive some of it. But the idea of giving charity to the poor is its own obligation that was always with us, right? And there's Meiser Sheni, which is used in certain years as specifically a charity for the poor. And there's always an obligation to give charity to the poor. So even though you could say, well, I'm sacrificing the use of that money that I could use to go on vacation and giving it to poor people, it's not really the same as a sacrifice, right? To give charity is its own obligation. And as I understand it, the sacrificial system was replaced by the prayer system. And specifically, right, that we say the Shemona Esrei, the standing prayer, 3 times a day. The sacrifices were brought morning and evening on behalf of the whole nation. But most people were not bringing animal sacrifices very often, right? It's a fairly rare occurrence. Maybe you did it once a year when you brought the Pesach, maybe a few times a year when you made mistakes, or you wanted to bring festival offerings, peace offerings when you went on the pilgrimage festival, but it certainly wasn't a daily thing. The daily prayer, right? Each prayer, each day of it is maybe a little bit less intense than bringing the offerings, but making that commitment to do it every day, day after day after day after day, well, you're certainly sacrificing a lot of time in your life, and that is a beautiful, give back to the Lord. I've been doing that for a long time. Now that I'm in Avelis for my mom and saying Kaddish 3 times a day, which can only be done with a minyan, I've been praying with a minyan in the morning and evening for a long time. But, if stuff came up, I'd be a lot more likely to say, I'll just pray at home. Something came up. But to say Kaddish for my mom, I can only do with a minyan. So I've been very committed. While we were in production on the movie, it was very difficult, and sometimes just stuff comes up in life. But I've been very regular, about as regular as I could possibly be, with getting to a minyan every day, and sometimes finding myself in really interesting minyanim, different congregations, during travels and stuff like that, or odd times as my schedule demands. And sometimes I think, wow, every morning I'm there for 45 minutes, plus travel there and travel back. On Mondays and Thursdays, it's more like an hour. These days, I'm also leading the prayers very often because you do that when you're in Kaddish, davening. It's called davening from the Amud, being the prayer leader. In the evenings, it's 25 minutes, and it's just every day. It's like you think, I'm very busy. I don't have enough hours in a day to do the things I got to do. And I'm setting aside an hour every morning or a little more. But I'll tell you something, you get very regular with your prayer practice. It's good. It's good. It's very good for your life. It's good for your relationship with God. It's good on so many levels, and you can't feel it each day. Very often you're like, oh God, I can't believe I gotta go. But over time, that regularity of showing up for God is a real blessing. It's been a blessing in my life, and I highly recommend. Maybe your situation is you don't have a synagogue you could go to and pray with a congregation. But setting aside that regular time every day to pray at home alone, still huge, very, very big. Making a regular time for prayer, a regular time for learning every day, huge. Bill, now there's a spiritual practice. Imagine how your behavior would be different if God called to complain every time you did something wrong and only he could see. Imagine. Tom, there is a Mishna that deeds of loving kindness replace the sacrifices. Also, the thrice daily prayer services replace the temple services. And charity is said to be equal to all the other mitzvahs combined. There you go. It's not that charity is specifically a replacement for prayers, but Torah studies definitely thought to be equivalent to all the other commandments combined. But charity, probably just as high a level, right? Also, the world stands on three things: Torah, Teshuvah, and Tzedakah. The more we do of these practices, the better, clearly. Lucy, if they ended up with an unusable sin-offering animal, maybe they could let a Gentile neighbor take it. Yeah, you wish that was the case, right? And maybe they just did that and sort of accepted the transgression because they couldn't bring themselves to just submit an animal to starve to death. But the correct practice is no. Even it's a very small benefit to you to give away the animal to somebody who could really use it. Still, you ended up in a bad spot. Right? If it was your own fault, okay, you put yourself in that situation. Where it's really tragic is somebody, took a vow of nazirus. He was prepared to do it and set aside the animals, including the sin offering, and then he died before he could complete it. What did he do wrong? He didn't do anything wrong. And yet that animal is going to end up paying that terrible price. And maybe that's just another reason why it's considered a little bit, it's not a sin, but it's a little bit sinful to take that vow of nazirus unnecessarily, and it's never necessary. I'm trying to understand what this is. Is this a person whose handle is 100% Truth GMS? Asking, what is your view on who is a Jew? Since in Megillah it says that anyone who shuns idol worship is a Jew, is conversion necessary to be a Jew in the eyes of Hashem? There's a lot going on in that question. I'm not familiar that it says in the book of Esther, which is what we usually mean by the Megillah, that anyone who shuns idol worship is a Jew. I'm not familiar with that teaching. To be considered one of the Jewish people, if you're not born a Jew and you go through a conversion, a proper conversion, then you're just as much a Jew as anyone else. And there's no distinction between you and the other Jews. And it is in fact prohibited to remind a convert that they converted to Judaism. That is prohibited. That is a sin. So a convert to Judaism is a Jew like any other Jew. But do you become a Jew just by saying you're a Jew? No, you do not. It is not enough to just say, I feel like a Jew, I want to be a Jew, I call myself a Jew. If you're not born Jewish, to become a Jew, you're going to have to go through an education process, which is what's required nowadays. Eventually you're going to immerse in a mikvah to complete the conversion. But it's interesting, most of the conversion process is education. Why? Because you are taking upon yourself to be bound by all the commandments of the Torah. And, if you weren't born bound by all those commandments, okay, so, you are bound by the 7 Noahide commandments that bind all humans. And there's plenty to do and plenty of ways to show your love and thanks and praise for God as a righteous Noahide. But if you are a Jew, then, all of the positive commandments that you neglect to do, you're going to be held accountable for that. if you weren't born that way, it's like, why take on that obligation, which then if you fail to fulfill, you're going to be accountable for? Okay, so you say, well, my soul longs to be a Jew. Fine, but we don't want you to take on that obligation without knowing what the obligation is. It's almost the opposite of the whole modern world, where every time you download an app to your phone, you're like, terms of service, click. I have no idea what I just signed. I have no idea what contract I just bound myself to. I don't care. I just want the fast, feedback, whatever, the immediate pleasure of TikTok, of Twitter, of whatever app I just downloaded to my phone. Whereas if you're going to become a Jew, and then you're going to be bound by the covenant, which is an extensive contract, right? That's what the Torah in a sense is, the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And we're going to be obligated in all these commandments. So the rabbis have said, well, you can't just sign on the dotted line without knowing what you're signing up for. And that's why you have the conversion process is largely an education process, so that you will know what is required for you to live as a religious Jew. And when you convert, it's to become a religious Jew. It's not just to become a Jew in name only. Tragically, there are a lot of conversions that are just, for whatever convenience, to get married, whatever it is, and they're not really, they're not really going through a proper process because they're not intending to take on the mitzvahs. There's a lot more to that conversation. It's beyond the scope of today. But the point is that if you go through a proper conversion, it's like you read the fine print. You realize what it was that you were signing up for, right? So, in terms of, one kind of conversion process versus another, I'm not commenting on that. But I'm saying if you go through a conversion that doesn't include a proper education of what it is that you're signing up for, you might want to complete that education process. Okay, that's what I've got to say today. It's great learning with you, my good friends. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Saturday night, for page 26. It'll be about an hour after Shabbos ends. So I think we'll try to get on the air by like 7:15, 7:20 tomorrow night, Pacific time. Good Shabbos.